Hello, this is Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to the Sunday Forum for this Sunday, October the 6th, where our theme is this very important prayer from Deuteronomy chapter 6, the Shema. Now, first I have to say, we're entering into 4 weeks of a sermon series, and let me just go over each of the themes of the next 4 weeks in October. October 6th is I Only Want You. The focus will be our life in God. The second week, October 13th, Walk This Way, which takes a look at our personal life. October 20th, In and Not Of, well, focus in on God and country as we come up on our election season. And October 27th, of course, the Reformation, keeping the first things first. And that is our focus, how to keep the first things first. Our life in God, our personal life, God and country, and of course the Reformation, that God has justified us through faith. What inspires all this sermon series is a quote from Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau. In the long run, humans only hit what they aim at. And so those will be 4 themes that we're aiming at during this October season. So the first sermon will focus on I Only Want You. How do we have the first things as our life in God? Deuteronomy 6. The Shema, here let me read it from Deuteronomy 6. And I'm going to challenge you at the end of this video to memorize this prayer by heart, because Jesus prayed it. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And it goes on for there. We now want to turn to the Bible Project, where we will see a couple clips as they explain to us some of the most important aspects of this prayer, the Shema.
For thousands of years, every morning and evening, Jewish people have prayed these well-known words as a way of expressing their devotion to God. They're called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. Now, the first word of the Shema is hear, or listen, which in Hebrew is pronounced Shema. That's where the prayer gets its name. Now, Shema is a really common word in the Hebrew Bible, and it's obvious why. Hearing is a very universal activity. It's usually connected with the ear, as in Proverbs chapter 20, ears that shema and eyes that see, the Lord has made them both. Now that seems basic enough, but if you look at the other ways that Hebrew authors can use the word Shema, they use it to mean more than just let sound waves enter your ear. In Hebrew, Shema can also mean pay attention to or focus on. So when Leah, who wasn't loved by her husband Jacob, she has a son, and she names him Simon, or in Hebrew, Shim'on, because, she says, the Lord has sham'ad, that I am unloved. So Shema means to hear and to pay attention to, and even more. It can also mean responding to what you hear. This is why so many of the cries for help in the book of Psalms begin with a call that God listen. Psalm 27, verse 7. Shema my voice when I call, O Lord. Be merciful, answer me. So asking God to Shema is at the same time asking God to act, to do something. It's similar to when God asks people to listen. Like when the people of Israel come to Mount Sinai, God says, if you Shema me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Now, there's a couple interesting things about this verse in Exodus. In Hebrew, the word Shema is repeated twice in this sentence to give it emphasis. If you Shema, Shema, meaning listen closely. But also notice that from God's point of view, listening is basically the same as keeping the covenant. So when God asks the people to Shema, what he means is that they listen and obey. And that's the last fascinating thing about Shema. In ancient Hebrew, there is no separate word for obey, meaning to carry out the wishes of someone who knows better than you or is in authority over you. So in the Bible, if you want to say, I will listen and do what you say, you use the single word, Shema. In Hebrew, listening and doing are 2 sides of the same coin. This is why later in Israel's history, when the people were breaking their covenant promises to God, the Hebrew prophets would say things like, they have ears, but they're not listening. The Israelites, of course, could hear just fine, but they weren't actually listening, or else they would act differently. And so in the end, listening in the Bible is about giving respect to the one speaking to you and doing what they say. Real listening takes effort and action, and that's the Hebrew word Shema.
Now, as you heard from the Bible Project, the word Shema can be translated two ways, as listen and as hearing. Both. When I listen, when I really listen, I hear and I obey. Another aspect, though, of this important prayer is the heart. How do we give our whole heart to God, keeping the first things first? Once again, let's turn to the Bible Project.
We're going to look at the fourth key word in this prayer, heart, which in Hebrew is sometimes pronounced levav, or more often in a shorter form, lev. Now, different cultures throughout history have had different conceptions of how the human body works, and this is also true of the ancient Israelite writers of the Bible. They knew that the heart was an organ in the chest that sustains life. There's mention of a heart attack in the Bible, Naval, whose heart died inside of him and he became like stone. But the biblical authors talk about the heart in many other ways that might seem strange to modern readers, and that's because these Israelites had no concept of the brain or any word for it. They imagined that all of a human's intellectual activity takes place in the heart. For example, you know with your heart in the Bible. Your heart is where you understand and make connections. In the book of Proverbs, wisdom dwells in the heart. And your heart is what you use to discern between truth and error, like Solomon did when he was king. So the heart is where you think and make sense of the world, and it's where you do more. In the Bible, the heart is where you feel emotions. You feel pain in your heart, like Hannah did when she couldn't have any children. In fact, the phrase "a broken heart" comes from ancient biblical Hebrew. You also experience fear in your heart. Your heart can melt or be distressed. Your heart can even be depressed. But then on the flip side, your heart is where you experience joy. In Hebrew, to be happy is to be good of heart, or to have a heart of joy. So the heart is the generator of physical life. It's also the center of your intellectual and emotional life, and there's more. In biblical Hebrew, the heart is where you make choices motivated by your desires. So David had it in his heart to build a temple for God. Your heart is where your affections are centered. They're called the desires of your heart. And if you really want something and go after it, it's like what Nathan said to David, whatever's in your heart, go and do it. So then, in the Bible, the heart is the center of all parts of human existence, as in the well-known proverb, guard your heart, because from it flows your whole life. Now, the prophet Jeremiah believed that the human heart was fundamentally broken. He said, the heart of a human is deceitful above all, irreversibly sick. Who can even understand it? He had watched a whole generation turn away from God. They started sacrificing their children as if that were a good thing. So this is why, in the imagination of the Hebrew prophets, the only hope for humanity is the total renewal of the human heart. Moses predicted that if Israel was ever going to love their God, their heart would need to be circumcised, which is a very vivid and surprising metaphor about removing evil and stubbornness from the human heart. David, after he committed murder and adultery, pleads with God to create in me a pure heart. The prophet Ezekiel hoped for a day when God would remove the heart of stone and give his people a new heart of soft flesh, which is very similar to Jeremiah's hope that God would write the commands of the Torah on the hearts of his people. And that brings us all the way back to the Shema. Every day, God's people are called to devote to God their whole body and mind, their feelings and their desires, their future and their failures. This is what it means to love the Lord your God with all of your heart.
So now we've heard some important aspects of this prayer. A prayer that Jesus prayed twice in the New Testament, in Matthew 22, verse 37, and in Mark 12, verses 28 and following. Although Jesus added the mind to the end of this prayer, to worship God with our whole heart, all our strength, and our mind. So let me challenge you this week to learn this prayer by heart. It's a prayer Jesus prayed and that we want to lift up as well as we focus on the first things in our lives. But also, we want to play some music to reinforce this important theme. And it's music that's going to guide us through all 4 weeks of this sermon series, how to keep the first things first. And so go back, learn the prayer, and sing along the refrain of this beautiful song. Thanks for joining us on the Sunday Forum.
First things first, I seek your everlasting.